Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to the eDiscovery Channel. This is Tom O'Connor, as always, from wonderful but soggy downtown New Orleans, Louisiana. We're about 200 miles east of the anticipated landfall of Hurricane Delta, which is from the sky outside my window here any moment now, probably within the next couple hours. And as always, I'm joined by Rocky Messing. Rocky, your title, I always forget, the Senior Program Manager? Is that your title?
Yes, very official sounding title.
It's Bill Gates and you, right? Yeah, Senior Program Manager.
Precisely. Yeah.
And Rocky is coming to us not from his, normally not from his home in Israel, but you're still in Charm City.
I am in
Maryland.
Charm City, Baltimore, Maryland. Balmer, sorry.
Balmer, my old hometown, up on Greenmount Ave. We call you Hun.
Exactly. We'll get a little, John Waters and
exactly, exactly. And we are really happy to be joined today by Julie. Julie Brown is now looking at us like, wow, I really agreed to talk to these two.
Right. What did I get myself into?
Is it too late to bail? Julie is, and let me see if I get this right, Julie, you're the Director of Practice Technology at the Columbus, Ohio office of Vorys, Seymour and Pease. Is that all correct?
That's correct.
Okay,
all right.
Tom.
Oh,
impressed.
Yeah, it's called a pen and paper, actually.
Ah, yes.
I didn't have that burned in my.
By the way, Tom, I think we need to stop recording these in general because it seems like every single time that we record one, you've got a hurricane bearing down on you.
Yeah, well, that's it. Well, we'll be okay in another month. It's hurricane season, and this has been an active hurricane season, despite Vice President Pence's assertion that there's no more hurricanes now than there were, which may or may not be true. Who knows? We've only been tracking them for 100 years, but they are definitely stronger than we have seen, at least from my 20-year point of view being down here. We have seen a real uptick this season on storms coming into the Gulf of Mexico. This is the sixth time, I believe, to your point, Rocky, that New Orleans has been in the cone, the Cantori cone, we call it, where we may get hit. And it's been a very, very active season. So yeah. So Julie is coming off from something almost as equally exciting. This was, now correct me if I'm wrong, this was your second year as the co-chair at ILTA-ON, but you had to preside over what morphed into ILTA-ON, the virtual ILTA-ON conference. So that was a first. And I want to ask a question about that in a second, because that came up pretty quickly on you guys. You had to shift lanes there really fast. But maybe tell us, though, a little bit about your background, Julie. How did you get into this crazy business of ours?
Sure. Well, actually, I started as a hairstylist, believe it or not, in the early 80s, and decided that probably wasn't what I wanted to do the rest of my life, and decided to go to college. And one of the college counselors said, you should go through our paralegal program. I think you would love it. And so I ended up doing that. I started working as a paralegal at a firm back in 1987.
And is this all in Ohio? I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, this was actually up in Toledo, which is my hometown.
Okay.
And so I was at a big firm for Toledo, but really a small firm. It was 75 lawyers. So, it was in today's world, that's
Big
really
fish,
small.
Small pond.
Yeah. So I dipped my toe in technology way back then with early software like Discovery ZX, which was for depositions. And I started teaching webinars and seminars on Discovery ZX and whatnot. So I should have known back then that I was going to kind of end up in the technology space. But actually in 1990, I left the law firm and went to Owens Corning to their law department. And I spent 10 years there in litigation, started as a paralegal, ended up as an operations leader, and left there in 2001 to join Vorys. And I've been almost 20 years.
Yeah.
I started their litigation technology department, which we recently transformed into practice technology, a broader range of support that we're offering the firm. So I've been around what seems like a really long time.
That's
I'm leaning
awesome.
over because I've got a device that keeps beeping at me. I'm trying to dispose of it.
Yeah, as we said, this is a very informal.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with ILTA, Julie?
So ILTA, around I would say around 2004 or 5, I wanted to start having like little litigation technology meetings in Columbus, like with other people that were doing what I was doing, because it was such a wild west approach to everything. So I was very curious, what are you doing? How are you handling this? And so I started just having local meetings, little round tables, inviting other firms to come. And then the ILTA city rep at the time, Tim Hook, said, "Hey, Julie, why don't you formalize this and become an ILTA city rep for lit support?" And I was like, well, okay, and because they'll handle your invites and do all this stuff. And I was like, okay, cool.
Right.
So I ended up being the first litigation support city rep because all my meetings were specific to lit support, as opposed to all the breadth of what ILTA handles. And it started there and took off, and I then joined the steering committee at a national level for lit support. When I was on the steering committee, I was still a city rep too, and then I became the liaison to the conference committee from the steering committee, and that was like in 2011. So I started actually on ILTA-ON way back in 2011, and spent the last really 9 years. So it's kind of it's like losing a child in some respects. At first, I was like, I don't know what to do with myself because I don't have ILTA this year, or ILTA-ON. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, so okay, before we get into a little bit more on ILTA-ON, I'm just curious. So you started this group to kind of understand a little bit more about what people were doing and how they were doing it. Back in like you said, it was the Wild West. Like, were people doing things that you guys were doing already? Did you find that you were kind of on the more advanced side at that point? Were you learning more from others? Kind of where did you find yourself in the industry at that point?
I think we were a little ahead, although I still learned from other people because we all were using different tools, and situations would come up like, if you remember back we used to have a ton of Lotus Notes people in Ohio. I don't know, whoever was a salesperson did a really great job because in Ohio we had Lotus Notes all over the place. And so it was a big struggle. It was a common struggle amongst the firms in Columbus to get NSF files processed correctly because the software just wasn't there yet. It was not doing a good job. So I would say along the way, my team really developed a lot of standards, protocols, procedures, and so on that end we were probably a little advanced. I also joined EDRM in 2006, so that gave me a lot of insight at the national level that I think I could take back to Ohio and talk about. So I think that was a great opportunity.
Cool. Okay, so now let's jump ahead a little bit and get to the big change that happened this year in ILTA-ON. So, I mean, first of all, you guys did an incredible job.
It was a great job. It was really, especially on such a short notice. Yeah.
But when did you guys really realize that, like, hey, this is not going to happen in person? Like, when did that set in that, like, this is not going to be good this year?
So I'm always the glass is half full. So I kept going, nope, we're going to have it. We're going to have it on prom. It's going to be fine. But we really, I would say in February we put the grid together, and that's like a big monumental moment. That's where we set the schedule, and then in March we went, and then probably 1st of April we were going hybrid. It's going to be a hybrid event. We'll still have some on the ground, but we're going to do a hybrid, with some virtual component to it. So we were trying to figure out how to broadcast live from ILTA-ON, and how would we work this hybrid conference.
And if I could just interrupt, I'm sorry. Was the hotel open at that point? Because I recall that hotel had shut down.
It was closed, if I remember correctly. But ILTA was still in conversation with the folks that coordinate all that. And then it was really end of May, June 1st before we said it's all virtual. So we really were looking at about two months and 3 weeks to prep and to turn it around. You know, for the most part, a lot of the sessions we had brainstormed were still strong and could stand on their own. But for some groups, the world had changed so much that they kind of threw out their list and started over and said, we have to present what's totally relevant to people right now. And so the IT ops group really took a look at what is going to be most important in August to our people and what has changed in our world. And so, I mean, kudos, the conference committee was just phenomenal. We have about between 35 and 40 conference volunteers, and they just, I mean, they knocked it out of the park. My job was super easy because, you know, my co-chair, Mike Vecito, and I, our job was to, you know, keep people on pace. And, you know, my big thing as a co-chair is you're really a cheerleader, right? You're trying to keep people positive and energized and keep them thinking about how to engage the audience and how to bring in the best speakers. And so it really, I didn't have the challenge of developing all the sessions and the session descriptions and going out and getting all the speakers and that type of thing. So.
Right. And so, okay, so now we jump to come August, and you've got the, you know, attendance is looking good. You've got the sessions in line, and you start day one, and like, what was your feeling as day one was going on and you see this actually working?
It was weird. It was really weird. So, as a co-chair last year in 2019, you arrive like on Thursday before conference, right, and you rehearse for your stage events, and it's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress because you know you're going to get up before the keynote and do some kind of, you know, fun little skit, and there's, you know, 3,000 people in the audience, so that's a lot of pressure. But it's also fun. And we also have like a roast with the whole conference committee on Sunday morning before we kick it off. And so there's all this momentum going up to conference. So when you arrive Monday morning at 7 o'clock for your dry run, you are so just overwhelmed. So this year I got up, I went out and got a cup of coffee. I sat down, I turned the news on, and I thought, today's ILTA-ON.
Right.
What do we do?
It was just the weirdest feeling. It's like, okay, it's gonna be okay. We just go get dressed and go in your room, and but it was definitely not the same feeling that you would get from being on the ground, especially as part of the conference committee. And that's the one thing I really missed, not so much for myself, but for Mike, who it was his first year as co-chair, so he didn't get that experience. For the whole conference committee, because they worked so hard all year, and you know, it's nice it's good for them to get up in front of the room, even if they're just saying, you know, the welcoming people and giving them kind of the you know, turn your phone off and answer the surveys and stuff. It's still a speaking opportunity for them, and so a lot of that we didn't have this year. So some of the reward of being on conference committee, I think, wasn't as great.
But you know, the flip side of that, Julie, is I thought you really used the technology to attempt to emulate that as best you could. Right. You know, some of the sessions didn't just do Zoom sessions, but they used the breakout room feature. So you had 200 people on a Zoom session, which is kind of unwieldy. Okay, let's break up into groups of 15 or 20, and you know, that was and went very smoothly. But also the water cooler and the chat rooms and the, you know, the games. I mean, there was a lot of things to make it more than just a online webinar type conference, and I thought that was very successful from my perspective as a blogger and somebody who writes about it, the input and the press room that we had from Beth Ann Stube and all the folks that did all the press and the marketing, they were great. I mean, we had a briefing every morning. We would have our own little get together, and they talk about the stats from the day before and what was going on and if there were any changes. I just thought that, and I've been involved in about 4 or 5 other conferences now, virtual conferences, and I thought your use of the technology was just outstanding. So.
Well, thank you, but I have to give complete kudos to the ILTA staff on that. And the ILTA staff is pretty amazing because, as you know, there was a restructure and a reorg, and there's huge financial implications to ILTA because of the ILTA-Con was, was a big revenue generator. So Dawn Hudgens, who broke her back to coordinate a lot of the events and the scheduling for the conference, so the games and the just a lot of that. Corey Simpson is amazing. So in June, ILTA had LegalSec, and they used a vendor to supply all the technology. And so when we decided it was going all virtual, we looked at that technology to do ILTA-ON. It was price prohibitive. There was no way we could run the conference because there's so many tracks going at the same time, and so the cost was based on how many tracks are going at the same time.
Yeah.
So Corey and his team literally built the conference platform from June to August.
Wow.
All of that was done internally by ILTA, and they now have a platform they can reuse for future conferences. But I was just amazed at how well everything worked, how easy it was to get everything for a system that was built in literally 2 months. So,
and I'll tell you, I attended LegalSec as well, and I thought ILTA-ON was, from the technical and the movement point of view, was better. So super kudos to them for that. Wow.
Yeah, they deserve total all of the benefits of the technology that people got goes to the ILTA staff.
Cool.
So from a feedback perspective, what we're now a month and a half or so, almost 2 months, post ILTA-ON. What have you been hearing, like in terms of both the actual what happened during ILTA and in terms of from a go forward? Obviously we all hope that sometime soon we'll be able to all get back together. Not so sure that's going to happen so soon, but is this now going to be part of the plan for ILTA-Con and kind of what's the go forward?
Sure. Well, first, the feedback has been tremendous. I mean, we did get all the evaluations back from all the sessions and got really, really good positive comments on the level of the education and whatnot. I know the new co-chairs, Mike Vecito and Martha Briel at McGuire Woods. They've already had their kickoff meeting for ILTA-Con 2021. So the planning process starts very early. I think that I can't say for certain, but all the discussions we had were that, first of all, there's going to be an on the ground event in Las Vegas at Mandalay Bay. So that's where ILTA is going to be next year. But also there will be a virtual component to it. And I think forever there will be that. This year changed it so that, you're always going to have some type of virtual component to ILTA-Con, regardless of whether we're all back or not. It just makes sense. You can reach such a broader audience, and more people can attend at an affordable rate. You're not going to get the same level of interaction that you have in person, but you still can get some great education, find out what other firms are doing, what companies are doing, and so it's very valuable in that.
Yeah, you said something that I think is really important going forward, which is affordable for people. I suspect you'll probably know this better, being in a firm setting, Julie, but travel budgets are going to be limited. Let's say we get back to even close to normal next year. You're not going to go back to work and a month later and say, hey, I need to go to Vegas for a week for a conference.
You're absolutely right, and that's that's a big concern. Is it's not just is business back to normal, but what impact does it have on the economy and for law firms at that time? So that's a huge concern.
Interview with the CEO of Southwest Airlines who said he didn't think business travel for his company would be back to normal until Q1 of 2022. He thought, assuming we get the virus under control, he thought next year would just be an adjustment year, and it's going to be a while until if we ever get back to those levels. I mean, we all got used to jet setting around quite a lot. Flying on Southwest is hardly what I call jet setting, but can I have extra jets, please?
I agree. I mean, don't you think we've all kind of adjusted and found different ways to do things more economically, and you don't always have to be in person? I'm really interested to see where the virtual hearings and trials go. And how that trends out even when we get back to normal. Will we continue to see virtual depositions, virtual hearings, virtual trials kind of take hold because they're more cost effective? So
I agree. I mean, part of this is, we've had the technology. I not to put down attorneys at all, because of course we all work with attorneys. Well, I am one, but but oftentimes
we try to ignore that.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. Oftentimes they treat technology the way the apes in 2001 treated the obelisk. Like arr, 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 arr. I can vividly remember Andy Adkins when he was the chair of the ABA Tech Show, and I was on the board for a couple of years with him, and we tried to do just some sessions remotely. Now, granted, the technology was much more primitive back then and much more expensive, but the concept, oh no, we couldn't possibly do that. We need to be in person. It's just not really a conference unless it's in person. So sometimes it takes a disaster to force you to look at other ways of doing business, and I think that's what's happening.
Although I do think that the importance of that interaction, because it isn't the same. I mean, the as good as ILTA managed and a couple others are doing a pretty good job at running virtual conferences, I do think that there's still something missing. I mean, that's the whole reason why we're doing these interviews is because you're missing that personal one-on-one time, that ability to just sit and talk and meet in the hallway, and no matter how good the water cooler type environments that these virtual conferences make, it's still not the same. You're missing the walking around with someone and that someone introducing you to two people who you don't know. You're not going to jump into a private breakout room with those people on a virtual conference. So I think there is something, and especially for the young technologists in our industry, the people who haven't been here for 20 years, 30 years, it's hard. It's hard to make those connections, and from a business development standpoint, from a technology development standpoint, of really understanding what the attorneys need, what the corporations need, what the law firms need. It's a lot harder to get that feedback and to get that true understanding of what people actually are looking for when you're trying to develop new technologies.
And some people will, let's face it, some people will say things to you one-on-one in a private or personal, that even in a it's not a phone call, but on a Zoom conference, they're not going to say.
They won't say it.
They'll be more honest. The other thing is, for me at least, ILTA-Con in particular has always been a place where, you mentioned it in passing, Julie, the educational content is very high. Without casting aspersions on any other conferences, we have a high degree of vendor influence on sessions in many conferences. That's not the case at ILTA. It's educational and high level educational, high level of content. So that's really important to me. But I also, from a personal point of view, get to see people who I won't see, like Julie.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't get to see you. You know, if it isn't for ILTA-ON, I may run into you at Legal Tech, but sometimes I don't go.
I don't go either, so
yeah.
I don't see people there.
Exactly.
Yeah, I miss seeing people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And the energy, there's just an energy about it, and people are excited, and it's just you can't recreate that, I don't think, virtually.
My good friend David Clark, I'm sure you know Dave. He's active in the organization out in Salt Lake, and that is literally the one place a year I get to see him.
Yeah.
And we talk, and we talk on the phone maybe once a month, and email all the time. But yeah, it isn't the same. It isn't the same.
So, Julie, I wanted to ask you a different question. Just to me, from a corporate perspective, it feels like there's been a little bit of a shift in ILTA and some of the other organizations towards the corporate legal technology, having more of an influence, more attendees, more participation. Is that something that's just my sense? And again, it's kind of from me seeing it with my peers and you know, the people who I'm talking to on a regular basis. Is that something that ILTA's actually seen and that you've seen from, you know, your participation, not just in ILTA, you're involved in other organizations. Have you seen this kind of shift with corporate legal technology taking a little bit more of a influence and a little bit more control?
Absolutely. And I think it's a good thing, because at one time I was in house, and the law department I worked for, you want to talk about control. We actually issued work orders to our attorneys around the country, and they got a work order that said you get 0.3 to do this, and then when they billed, if it exceeded that, it got kicked out. It was all automated. And that was back in the 90s. We built that system to manage the asbestos litigation, because it was just out of control. So, but I really think working there, I learned that if you don't manage your law firms, it can get out of hand. I mean, they're doing stupid stuff sometimes. So, well, you know, you do, and they'll be like, do this at whatever cost. No, don't do it at whatever cost. This is, you know, this is somebody's money. So I think, I do think law firms have improved tremendously, because they have legal technology people, because that are helping them be efficient and not do those kind of things. But I do feel like corporate has definitely issued edicts and said, thou shalt do this, and thou shalt, you know, which I think is their prerogative. I mean, if it's your budget, you have the right to say how that's going to be spent. So yeah, and I think law firms, at least legal technologists and whatnot, when I attend a conference, I want to hear what the corporate members have to say. I want to hear the trends, what's important to them, what's not going well, what is going well, what should we be doing if we're not doing it. So I think there's definitely an interest there. I think ILTA, for the last, I want to say 6, 7, 8 years, we've had a corporate track. We don't call them tracks usually. This year we did because it was virtual. So we've had those all along, and we've had corporate members on conference committee that actually schedule and arrange those. Is that what you were getting at? Did I answer it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also the actual, not just the trends, but actually more than just influence. It's the need and the adoption of legal technology within a corporation, bringing things in-house.
Yeah.
That's shifting the direction of legal technology overall. At least that's what I'm seeing.
Yes.
I think, yeah, the fact that ILTA has had this corporate track and the ability to actually reach out to the corporate members is probably, you know, it's good to hear that those numbers have been growing, and that it's not just my general perception, but that's actually what's happening there.
And the corporations who have any sizable litigation book of cases are definitely moving towards doing it internally, which totally makes sense. there's a lot of corporations that don't have that huge litigation footprint, right? And so that's where I still see the law firms helping them, because they don't really have enough to build their own internal process. So,
right. From your position in your team, do you guys find that you are more, I'm going to say, consulting internally with the attorneys within the firm, or are you guys actually now reaching out and helping those, corporations that don't have the, obviously by us, we've got our litigation technology team, we've got operations teams, et cetera, we're of the size that we would do that, but with plenty of corporations that don't have it, do they actually go to your team to look for that kind of assistance and that kind of consulting?
Yeah, particularly on the collection piece. And it's interesting because I've actually had to kind of share my screen to show somebody how to collect from Microsoft Teams, because they had it, but they kept saying this is going to be, 1,000 terabytes. And I'm like, no, that can't be. I'm giving you this. I'm giving you. So, I find that a lot of times those companies, even if they have resources, they don't know how to use them. And we've seen it over the years, for years and years, with archive solutions where people would produce stubs and, so we were constantly being involved with the IT folks internally to talk through how we can help with that. And it's interesting because then when you get a big client who has their own department, you need to back off, right? Because they don't want me to come in and say, here's what you should do. So it's right sizing what you're doing and really listening to what the client needs and wants. And if they don't need me in my department, that's okay too.
Right. How has the cloud kind of changed, or has it changed your guys' approach as more corporations are moving the data and moving their operations into the cloud? Have you seen that really shift what your team has had to do?
Not so much. I would like to see it more. And I've said if I was internal, in-house, and had any sizable litigation cases, I would really be moving towards managing it internally in Office 3 or Microsoft 365. Just when I look at it from an information governance perspective, as well as an e-discovery perspective, the less I send out my door, the less I have to worry about. So to the extent I could manage collections through production internally, I would only be sending out what I'm actually producing.
Why aren't people doing more of that? And this is something Rachi and I talk about a lot. Like, how come they haven't adopted Microsoft 365 or another tool,
or Google, or exactly. I mean,
and a lot of them have the tool. But again, it takes having the right people in place who understand the technology, who develop the processes around it. So, if you're going to run your own document reviews, right? And I'm going to send my outside counsel logins to my system to do a document review. Now I'm responsible for creating the review protocol, and I'm responsible for making sure the right fields are there. And I'm making, so what you're looking, you can't just say, I've got technology, let's do it. You've got to
skill up.
Yeah. And it's an investment. And so if you're going to do it, you have to have enough litigation to actually go hire the right people to come in and run that program. But if you think about the cost savings, I mean, some clients I've said, just look at what you spend to host your data. Just look at your annual spend on hosting your data elsewhere. Like, it's crazy. So,
and is, as you look at that skill up, what role does ILTA, ACEDS, like all of the various different education-based organizations, do you see those? I mean, obviously they're playing a role, but is that the future? Is really about skilling the technologists up and the internal teams and the law firm teams? Because even within a lot of the law firms, they don't have that level of skill. They have they might know collections, okay, but like across the entire spectrum of what's needed when managing the technology internally, I think there's a need for that skill up. And is that going to come from ILTA, ACEDS, maybe even some of the vendor-specific educational tracks, or is that something that we need more of a ground movement within the law firms themselves to get that going?
I think that's a good question, and it's fair. I think some of it will come from those organizations. As a person who has my own team, I think it's my job to develop my people and to develop them thoroughly and completely and beyond their wildest expectations. So I've never compartmentalized my people. In other words, I don't have people that do this and this and this. My people learn end to end. And we continually every year have a plan for what's next. So the latest and greatest, right? We're going to do something with Power Automate, right? My team's we're going to start building things with Power Automate that are valuable to us, so that when our lawyers need something, we're ready. And we don't need developers to do it. We actually have people that are trained in that. So we've been doing a lot in the last 2 years, I would say, with data analytics and building dashboards and that kind of thing. So expanding their knowledge beyond discovery now, right? So they're still doing e-discovery, but they're also learning new things beyond that. And we have to do that to prepare for, what happens if you see discovery going down internally at a law firm, the volume. What are you going to do with that team? And if you have superstars, you're gonna figure out how to leverage that knowledge and stuff. So so I really think all directors, managers really need to take it upon themselves to make sure they're educating their teams. I think it's great to go to ILTA and ACEDS and those, and the reason I got the Power Automate idea was because there was a session at ILTA on it, right? And I was like, oh, this is great. This is something I can take back to my team. So I think those are important, but I think it takes more than just attending a webinar. I think somebody has to be saying, let's do this. Let's apply it. Let's
dig in,
make it part of the business, right?
It's an old saying in IT that somebody has to own it.
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's a database or a project or a case, whatever, but somebody has to own it. And do you find that your clients are picking up on that from you, though, Julie, and asking for advice or looking at things you do and saying, "Oh, that's a good idea"? Has that transition happened yet?
I mean, we've built some stuff outward facing to clients, so and we've gotten positive responses on that. I think it's a little with e-discovery, it depends. So the clients that have, like Rachi said, the internal team, they don't really need me. I'm happy if they want. I'm happy to just have a chat and say, how are you doing this? And but they're busy, and a lot of times they're like, we got our thing and we're going. So
we're good. Thanks.
Yeah. I think for the companies that don't have a lot of litigation, I think we do need to talk to them about where their data is stored, how they're storing it, and sometimes say, don't do that anymore. Don't keep your email for 5 years. So
don't collect 100,000 terabytes. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, cool.
So, Tom, why don't you take us out?
The traditional parting question. So, Julie, we asked this of everybody, and the answers have been really interesting. If you could spend a day with anybody in our business, living or dead, doing whatever you want, not necessarily, as Rachi said earlier, doing a production, sitting around the bait stamps machines, labeling.
That's what I would do personally.
Yeah, I personally would.
Yeah.
I'd want a Bates party reunion party. Let's all get our Bates stick, because I know you all have them out there. I know you kept them. Everybody's got a Bates label or somewhere in their closet. Now that would be actually funny at an ILTA or someplace, Julie, to do that, to have a little Bates, lunch.
Bates stamping party.
A Bates stamping luncheon. Yeah. Free dessert for everybody who brings their own Bates label. Or But so we're not restricting it to a work, just somebody you would like to spend a day with, who would that person be and why?
So interesting question. When a lot of people went through my mind, right? Browning, always, I adored him. Mary Pat, who I occasionally still stay in contact with.
Right.
You, Tom, George, Craig. I mean, there's a whole list of people, and I was like, oh, who would I pick? And then I thought about, well, honestly, I think what I would spend it with is my team at work, because we're always working, we're always busy, and we try to have some social things and some fun things. But I would find it fascinating to take my team for 24 hours to a resort and just have fun, and really get to know each other even better than we do, even though I think I have some people that have been with me 19 years. So,
wow.
Yeah. So, but
so I'd like to see the budget request for that.
Yeah, yeah, it's not going to happen, right? But it would be so fun to do, zip line and just different activities and team building kind of things. I'd love to do paintball again. Years ago, I did paintball in the mountains out in Denver, for a corporate retreat, and that was a blast.
How many people on your team?
I only have 5.
So
it's a small team.
Yeah. Have a great time.
Yeah.
Wow.
In one of my companies, we actually did a half day at the U.S. National Whitewater Rafting Center outside Charlotte, which was like one of the most awesome things. We took the entire team and just went whitewater rafting for 4 or 5 hours, and it was
that's a great answer, though. I like that. Yeah, take the team and do non-work stuff.
Yep.
Yeah, not total non-work, no work allowed. Just
not allowed.
But have activities, so we're not just sitting around reading books or something, but like really do stuff that's fun.
It reminds me, Rocky, of the Carnegie Club. One of the things that I miss from the old days of the ABA Tech Show is that at the hotel, I always forget which chain it was. The Sheraton, the Hilton, they all blend together. I think it was the Sheraton down on the river there. But in the evening, people would be coming back in from their dinners or their meetings or their parties, and by about 11 o'clock, the lobby bar would have a group of about 20 people. Some of them were speakers, some of them were not, like Browning, and of course it was back in the day when you could also smoke indoors. So those of us who had cigars would light up, and just regular smokers would be smoking. Jim Kane used to yell at me when I'd light up a cigar, and but it was that sort of, nobody was really talking about work. It was a social event, and so now Rocky and his brother and I get together at a little cigar club called the Carnegie Club in New York when there's legal tech. It's about 2 blocks from the hotel, which last year, of course, was like going through the Antarctic tundra to get there. But the group has grown. Like last year, we ended up, as I recall, we had David Horrigan showed up, and all of a sudden we started with 3 of us, and there's a group of like 10 of us, over in the corner being rabble rousers. But the same thing, that ability to just interface. What you said earlier, Julie, what we miss the most about the conferences is that just getting together and bonding. And that's a great answer, though, to get your team to do that. That will be an interesting experience. You should try to get somebody to fund it. Get a vendor to fund it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Say it's we'll all wear your T-shirts if you.
First, I have to get to the point where I can actually be in the same room with my people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Are you guys back to work, or what's up? No. Okay.
No, we're our offices are open at 20% capacity, at least through January. But depending, they're whoever can work from home, they're saying work from home. And if you have a need to be in the office, then you have to get approval to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Well,
great. Thanks so much for the time, Julie. It's great talking. This is the conversation we didn't get to have this year at ILTA-ON because you were busy anyway, so we probably wouldn't have had the discussion. You had your hands full, but great job again. That was the ILTA-ON was a wonderful experience. I had a great time, professionally and personally. I thought it went very well.
Thank you.
So thanks for your time today, and hopefully we'll see you next year in Vegas. If not before, I'm skeptical. We're getting the first, pretty much. I hate to say anything formally because we don't know that it's formal, but the first couple of Mardi Gras crews have canceled their parades for this year. We're pretty sure Mardi Gras is not going to go. Of course, it's in mid-February. There's not going to be 1 million people coming to New Orleans. That's just not going to happen. So, we're kind of fingers crossed that things will be back to semi-normal by the summer. And Vegas, you said, right? Next year? Mandalay?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Mandalay.
Okay.
Bring your running shoes. So.
No.
Well, Tom, be safe through the hurricane. Rocky, my best to you and your family.
Thank you.
And I hope everything works out for you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Julie. Really great talking to you, Rocky. Pleasure as always. And to all our viewers, we'll see you next time on the eDiscovery channel.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.